She was just trying to catch her flight to Washington, D.C., when airport security decided she looked suspicious. What started as a routine security screening quickly turned into the TSA agents' worst nightmare. Because the black woman they were humiliating and strip-searching wasn't just any passenger, she was someone with the power to shut down entire airport operations with a single phone call. And when she calmly reached into her briefcase and flashed her TSA Director badge, their faces went pale as they realized they had just harassed their own boss. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was buzzing with its usual controlled chaos on Tuesday morning at 7. As the world's busiest airport, it processed over 280,000 passengers daily through its gleaming terminals, and today was no different. Business travelers hurried toward their gates with rolling luggage, families navigated the complex layout with children in tow, and the constant announcements of flight departures created a symphony of organized urgency. Director Angela Washington approached Terminal B's security checkpoint with the confident stride of someone who had navigated airports professionally for over 20 years. At 45, Angela was one of the highest-ranking black women in the Transportation Security Administration, serving as Regional Director for the Southeast Division, a position that gave her oversight authority over 15 major airports, including the very one where she now stood as a passenger. Angela was dressed in a tailored navy blue business suit that spoke of both professionalism and authority. Her appearance was immaculate, her credentials were impeccable, and her federal security clearance was among the highest in the nation. In her leather briefcase, she carried classified documents related to a national conference on airport security discrimination that she was scheduled to address in Washington, D.C. later that day. As she joined the TSA pre-check line, a privilege she had earned through her extensive background checks and federal employment, Angela noticed the usual morning efficiency of airport security operations. She had designed many of these protocols herself, had trained hundreds of agents in proper procedure, and had personally investigated countless discrimination complaints that had taught her exactly what proper treatment should look like. The first sign that something was wrong came when Agent Rodriguez, a 28-year-old TSA screener with 3 years of experience, looked up from his podium and made eye contact with Angela. Instead of the professional courtesy typically extended to pre-check passengers, Rodriguez's expression showed immediate suspicion and hostility. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of this line," Rodriguez said, his tone carrying an edge of authority that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Angela paused, confused by the request. "I'm sorry, is there a problem? I have TSA pre-check status." Rodriguez looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. "I need to verify your credentials. Please step aside." "Verify my credentials?" Angela repeated, maintaining her professional composure while noting the irregular nature of the request. In her 20 years of TSA experience, she had never seen pre-check passengers randomly pulled aside for credential verification without specific cause. "Yes, ma'am. We've had reports of fraudulent pre-check usage, and I need to confirm your eligibility." Angela knew this was false. There had been no recent reports of fraudulent pre-check usage at this airport, and even if there had been, random verification was not standard protocol. But she complied, stepping out of line and presenting her government-issued identification and pre-check documentation. Rodriguez examined her credentials with exaggerated scrutiny, taking far longer than necessary to review documents that were clearly valid and current. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to go through standard screening instead." "Standard screening?" Angela asked. "Agent Rodriguez, my pre-check status is valid and current. There's no reason to, ma'am, I make the decisions about screening procedures." Rodriguez interrupted. "You can either go through standard screening, or you can choose not to fly today." Angela felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with recognition. She had investigated enough discrimination cases to know exactly what was happening. Rodriguez had looked at her, a black woman in expensive business attire, and decided she didn't belong in the expedited security line. He wasn't following protocol. He was following bias. "Agent Rodriguez," Angela said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when addressing subordinates, "I'd like to speak with your supervisor." "My supervisor is busy," Rodriguez replied dismissively. "Are you going through standard screening or not?" Angela made a decision that would soon change everything at this airport. I'll go through standard screening. As she moved to the regular security line, Angela began documenting everything. The time, the agent's badge number, his exact words, and the lack of legitimate justification for the differential treatment. In her mind, she was already building the discrimination case that would result from this encounter. The standard security line moved slowly, giving Angela time to observe the operation she normally oversaw from an administrative level. She watched as other passengers were processed efficiently and courteously, noting the stark contrast between their treatment and her own experience. When Angela finally reached the X-ray machines, she encountered Agent Thompson, a stocky white man in his 40s, who had been with TSA for 8 years. Thompson looked at Angela's belongings as they came through the scanner, then looked at her with immediate suspicion. "Ma'am, I need to do a manual search of your bag," Thompson announced loudly enough for other passengers to hear. "Is there a specific concern?" Angela asked professionally. "I see some items that need closer inspection," Thompson replied, though Angela knew her bag contained nothing more than standard business documents, electronics, and personal items. Thompson began an unnecessarily invasive search of Angela's briefcase, removing every item and examining each one with theatrical thoroughness. He held up her laptop, her phone charger, and even her business cards, as if they were potential threats. "What's this?" Thompson asked, holding up a folder containing the classified documents Angela was transporting to the Washington conference. "Those are work documents," Angela replied calmly. "Work documents," Thompson repeated with obvious skepticism. "What kind of work do you do?" "I work in federal security," Angela said, which was true but deliberately vague. Thompson's expression suggested he didn't believe her. "Federal security." "Right. And what would someone in federal security be doing with documents like these?" "Agent Thompson," Angela said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Those documents are classified. You don't have clearance to examine their contents." Thompson laughed, actually laughed. "Ma'am, I have TSA clearance. I can examine anything that goes through this checkpoint." "TSA clearance doesn't qualify you to handle classified national security documents," Angela replied. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," Thompson said, his voice rising. "I'm going to need you to step aside for additional screening." That's when Agent Williams joined the situation. Jennifer Williams was a 32-year-old TSA agent who had been watching the interaction with growing interest. She approached with the kind of aggressive posture that suggested she saw Angela as some kind of threat, rather than a passenger exercising her rights. "Is there a problem here?" Williams asked Thompson. "This passenger is being uncooperative with security procedures," Thompson replied. "She's claiming her documents are classified and that I don't have clearance to examine them." Williams looked at Angela with obvious hostility. "Ma'am, you need to understand that we have the authority to inspect anything and everything that comes through this checkpoint. If you're not willing to comply with our procedures, you won't be flying today." Angela remained calm, but inside she was documenting every word, every violation of proper procedure, every instance of discrimination. These agents were about to learn a very expensive lesson about who they were dealing with. "I understand your authority," Angela said quietly. "I'm simply informing you that some of these documents require special handling due to their classification level." "Like classification level," Williams repeated mockingly. "And I suppose you're some kind of government agent." "I am a federal employee." Thompson and Williams exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They had clearly decided that Angela was either lying about her employment or exaggerating her importance, and they were about to make her pay for what they perceived as arrogance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to submit to additional physical screening," Williams announced. "Additional physical screening for what reason?" Angela asked. "For acting suspicious and being uncooperative with security personnel," Williams replied. Angela knew this was completely improper. Physical screening required specific justification, not subjective assessments of passenger attitude. But she also knew that resisting would only escalate the situation and potentially provide these agents with justification for even more aggressive actions. "Fine," Angela said, "but I want to document that this additional screening is being conducted without proper justification. You can document whatever you want, Thompson said with a smirk. It won't change anything. But Thompson was wrong about that. What he didn't know was that Angela Washington wasn't just documenting this encounter for a potential complaint. She was gathering evidence for a federal investigation that would expose systematic discrimination at one of the nation's busiest airports. Williams escorted Angela to a private screening area where the humiliation would continue to escalate. The private screening room was designed for legitimate security concerns, but Angela recognized immediately that she was being subjected to excessive and discriminatory treatment. "I'm going to need you to remove your jacket," Williams said. Angela complied, removing her navy blue blazer and standing in her white silk blouse. Williams examined the jacket with unnecessary thoroughness, checking every pocket and seam as if searching for contraband. "Now your shoes," Williams continued. Angela removed her professional heels and handed them over for inspection. Williams spent several minutes examining shoes that clearly posed no security threat. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to conduct a pat-down search," Williams announced. "A pat-down search," Angela repeated. "Agent Williams, what specific security concern justifies this level of screening?" "Ma'am, you've been selected for random additional screening," Williams lied. Angela knew this was false. Random additional screening followed specific protocols and was documented in ways that this encounter was not. Williams was conducting a punitive search designed to humiliate and intimidate, not to enhance security. "Agent Williams," Angela said, her voice taking on the steel that had made her one of the most respected directors in the TSA. "I need you to understand something. This screening is being conducted improperly, without justification, and in violation of TSA protocol." "Ma'am, I don't need lectures from passengers about TSA protocols," Williams replied dismissively. "Actually," Angela said, reaching slowly into her briefcase, "I think you do." Williams tensed, her hand moving toward her radio. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them." "My hands are visible," Angela said calmly. "I'm reaching for my federal credentials." Angela withdrew her official TSA identification, a leather wallet containing her director-level badge and federal law enforcement credentials. She opened it carefully and held it up so Williams could see clearly. "Director Angela Washington," Angela said, her voice now carrying the full weight of federal authority. "Transportation Security Administration, Southeast Regional Director." The change in the screening room was immediate and dramatic. Williams' face went from flushed with authority to pale with shock. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without any sound coming out. "Director Washington," Williams whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's right," Angela replied, closing her credentials and returning them to her briefcase. "The same Director Washington who oversees operations at this airport. The same Director Washington who reviews discrimination complaints. The same Director Washington who has the authority to terminate agents who violate federal civil rights laws." Williams looked like she was about to faint. "Director, this was just standard procedure." "Standard procedure," Angela repeated. "Agent Williams, in my 20 years with the TSA, I have never seen standard procedure that involves pulling pre-check passengers out of line without cause, conducting invasive searches without justification, and subjecting federal employees to discriminatory treatment based on their race." But the real shock was still coming, because Angela Washington wasn't just any TSA director. She was the leading federal expert on airport discrimination, and she had been conducting a covert investigation of this very airport for the past 6 months. What Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams didn't know was that Angela's business trip to Washington, D.C. was actually a cover for her return from an undercover operation. For the past 6 months, she had been traveling through major airports under assumed identities, documenting discrimination patterns as part of a classified Department of Homeland Security initiative called Operation Equal Access. The irony was devastating. The 3 agents who had just harassed her were subjects of the very investigation she was conducting. Their names were already in her confidential files, along with detailed documentation of their previous discriminatory actions against other passengers. Angela had witnessed Rodriguez pulling black passengers from the pre-check line on at least 4 previous occasions during her covert observations. She had documented Thompson's pattern of conducting unnecessary bag searches that targeted minorities at rates far exceeding statistical probability, and Williams had been recorded making racially charged comments about passengers during break-room conversations that Angela had monitored as part of her investigation. "Agent Rodriguez," Angela said, her voice taking on the clinical tone she used when building federal cases during my 6 months of covert investigation at this airport. "I have documented 17 instances of you removing black passengers from the pre-check line without legitimate justification. Would you like me to provide specific dates and times?" Rodriguez's face went from pale to green. He had no idea that his discriminatory behavior had been under federal surveillance for months. "Agent Thompson," Anna continued, "our statistical analysis shows that 73% of your random bag searches target minorities, despite minorities representing only 31% of passengers through your checkpoint. Can you explain this disparity?" Thompson's hands began to shake visibly. The mathematical evidence was overwhelming and legally devastating. "And Agent Williams," Angela said, turning to the female agent who had conducted the humiliating pat-down, "I have audio recordings of you telling colleagues that you enjoy making certain passengers understand their place during screening. Would you like me to play those recordings?" Williams looked like she was about to collapse. The existence of audio evidence transformed this from a he-said-she-said situation into a federal prosecution with ironclad proof. Angela pulled out a specialized government tablet that contained months of investigation data. Operation Equal Access has documented over 200 instances of discriminatory screening at this airport alone. We have video surveillance, statistical analysis, and witness testimony that proves systematic civil rights violations. The scope of the federal investigation was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Angela's team had embedded undercover agents throughout the airport and conducted detailed analysis of every screening decision made over a 6-month period. The Department of Homeland Security has been building a comprehensive case against discriminatory practices in airport security nationwide, Angela explained. This airport was selected as our primary target because of the volume of complaints we received. Thompson, who had been called into the screening room by Williams, arrived just in time to witness the revelation. When he saw Angela's credentials, his legs nearly gave out beneath him. "Director Washington," Thompson stammered, "there's been a misunderstanding. We were just following protocol." "Protocol," Angela said, pulling out a small digital recorder. "Agent Thompson, I need to inform you that this conversation is now part of an ongoing federal investigation into discrimination at this facility." The color completely drained from Thompson's face. "Federal investigation. For the past 6 months, the TSA Office of Civil Rights has been investigating complaints of racial profiling at this airport," Angela explained. "Complaints that follow exactly the same pattern as the treatment I received today. Black passengers being subjected to excessive screening, fraudulent justification for additional searches, and discriminatory enforcement of security protocol." Rodriguez, who had started this entire chain of events, was summoned to the screening room. When he arrived and saw Angela's credentials, he looked like he was witnessing his own execution. "Agent Rodriguez," Angela said, "you pulled me out of the pre-check line claiming there had been reports of fraudulent usage. Can you provide documentation of these reports?" Rodriguez's mouth moved, but no words came out. "That's what I thought," Angela continued. "Because there have been no such reports, you made a decision to subject me to additional screening based solely on your perception that a black woman didn't belong in the expedited line." The 3 agents stood frozen as the full scope of their situation became clear. They had not only discriminated against a passenger, they had discriminated against the federal official who had the power to end their careers. Angela pulled out her phone and made a call. "Assistant Director Martinez, it's Angela. I need you to come to Atlanta Hartsfield immediately. We have a situation that requires immediate federal response." Within 2 hours, federal investigators arrived at the airport to begin a comprehensive review of security operations. Within 6 hours, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams were suspended pending federal investigation. Within 24 hours, the story was national news, with footage from security cameras showing the discriminatory treatment of a high-ranking federal official. But the federal response extended far beyond these three agents. Angela's investigation had revealed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of airport management. Airport Security Chief Robert Manning was arrested on federal conspiracy charges. Internal emails showed that Manning had instructed supervisors to maintain appropriate demographics in the expedited screening lines. The investigation also revealed financial motivations behind the discrimination. Premium services at the airport generated significant revenue that management wanted to protect by maintaining an exclusive atmosphere. Federal prosecutors announced that 12 airport employees faced charges including conspiracy to violate civil rights and deprivation of rights under color of law. The investigation that followed revealed systematic discrimination that went far beyond three individual agents. Statistical analysis showed that black passengers at this airport were 400% more likely to be subjected to additional screening than white passengers, even when controlling for all legitimate security factors. Internal communications revealed a culture of racial profiling that was encouraged rather than discouraged. Supervisory agents had shared jokes about random selections that specifically targeted minorities, and training materials contained coded language that encouraged discriminatory practice. The Department of Homeland Security ordered a complete overhaul of operations at Atlanta Hartsfield, with new leadership, mandatory bias training, and federal monitoring of all security decisions. The three agents who had harassed Angela were terminated and faced federal civil rights charges. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the implementation of the Washington Protocol, new national standards for TSA operations that included statistical monitoring of screening decisions, regular civil rights audits, and severe penalties for discriminatory behavior. The Washington Protocol revolutionized airport security operations nationwide. Every screening decision was now tracked by race and ethnicity, with statistical analysis conducted monthly to identify patterns of bias. The protocol also established blind screening procedures for expedited lines, eliminating the subjective visual assessments that had enabled racial profiling. Training programs were completely overhauled to include extensive civil rights education, with agents required to pass annual certification exams. Failure to pass resulted in immediate termination. Angela's case became a landmark example of how discrimination could be effectively documented and prosecuted, leading to changes in TSA operations at airports nationwide. Her professional handling of her own harassment had created systemic reforms that would protect millions of passengers. Angela continued her work as regional director, but the incident had given her a new perspective on the passengers she served. She had always understood discrimination intellectually, but experiencing it personally had deepened her commitment to civil rights. The airport that had once been the site of systematic discrimination became a model for how proper security screening should operate. New procedures eliminated the subjective decisions that had enabled racial profiling, and regular audits ensured that all passengers were treated with equal dignity and respect. And Angela Washington, she continued flying through Atlanta Hartsfield on her way to conferences and meetings, but now every TSA agent in the airport knew that the professional black woman in the business suit was someone who had dedicated her life to ensuring that air travel was safe and fair for everyone. The message was clear: discrimination in airport security was not just morally wrong, it was federally illegal. And there were people in positions of authority who would use every tool at their disposal to ensure that civil rights were protected, even when they had to become victims themselves to prove the point. This story reminds us that discrimination still exists in places we might not expect, but there are people with the authority to stop it. If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect while traveling, subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and accountability. Hit the notification bell and let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced discrimination while traveling?